I posted over on Patreon asking if the Geek Crew could benefit from looking at exactly how to put everything into the garden. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. And by the way, the Geek Crew is not just on Patreon. If you're subscribed to this channel, you are part of the Geek Crew. You just come join the misfits of gardening. Okay, so first up is actual soil prep. I'm going to do a separate video on how to get potting soil ready to go / reuse it. This is soil, what I usually refer to as mineral soil, and these are kind of the rules you want to follow when it comes to preparing the bed for both transplants and seed starts. Your soil is going to look something like this. This is freshly placed in here, so you know, if it's in the ground, it's going to look slightly different and it may be slightly more compacted. Now, if you're choosing not to actually rototill, I would encourage you at a minimum to take a broad fork or a pitchfork and just kind of lift the soil. And then after that, you want at least an inch to a half inch kind of soft like this. Now, the way that you achieve that and the way that I do it, for example, on a bed that I have on the side of the house, is by breaking up these aggregates. Now, this aggregate doesn't mean that your soil is inherently compacted or anything. It's just, this is what soil does. So you want to actually break all these aggregates up and go through the entire space as much as possible. What I do find is that moist aggregates tend to break a lot easier than ones that are hard. So for example, this is hard, it doesn't have any moisture, so it's a little bit more difficult to break up, but this one is actually quite moist, and so it breaks up really nicely. So I'm going to prep this bed and get it ready to go just in this one section here so that I can get to planting. Okay, so this is kind of what your soil patch is going to look like. You'll have small little tiny aggregates, but no big clumps. And in particular, what we're looking for is when we dig down, that these clumps are broken up. So one way to achieve that, particularly if you're just aiming for an inch to half an inch, is actually to go through and give kind of a rake and a massage. If this is in ground and it's a larger space, what I would actually do is, and I unfortunately don't have any in-ground beds right now, but I would actually just break this up in the sections that I'm planting. So say I'm planting right here, what I would do is I would break up the aggregates kind of in this section, or I would break up the aggregates outside of that section and then move it into the space, like the broken up version. But just the top half inch where you're planting needs to be fluffed. In this case, I'm planting the whole bed, so that's why I'm trying to focus on making sure the entire bed is fluffed. Okay, so if we're dealing with something that's a little bit more established, meaning there is plant debris, weeds, and obviously mulch, what you're going to want to do in that case is obviously weed the section and remove any weeds that may be placed there. What you choose to do with the weeds, if you want to leave them in situ, you can, and just use them as a mulch in the future. But I'm going to yank these out. And then what I will do is I will move my mulch away from where I'm planting. So say I'm going to plant here, I'll move that away, and then I'm just going to go in and same thing, just kind of work this section. So again, it's nice and fluffy. See, this is soil that I very obviously have had for years because I don't have much, aggregation in it because I've been working on it for so long. That new bed is a little bit different. But then, yeah, you just want to have that in there and you're ready to go. And the mulch, you're going to want to leave kind of here. We'll talk about when to put this back in place later. Okay, so we're going to start off with seed sowing. So there's two kind of scenarios you're going to run into. One is a smaller seed, so like lettuce, dill, chamomile, very microscopic seeds. And then the other is likely to be something a little bit heavier in size, such as pumpkins or zucchini or watermelon or beets, peas, beans, anything like that. So my rule is knowing, and I did a video kind of on seeds and the light that they need to germinate. So my rule without even looking at the back of the package, so I don't have to refer to it over and over again, is that if I can take the seed and pinch it between my fingers and it snaps, that is a small seed, and that I will sow it according to what I normally sow small seeds. If it is something where if I pinch it and it's definitely not going to crack or break in half, then that in my mind is a large seed, so I will sow that one according to how I usually sow my large seeds. Now, every seed has a different seed starting depth. I don't follow any of them, to be totally honest. I just kind of go for it based on those two parameters, of course. But other than that, I don't put too much effort into it, and you really don't have to either. Okay, so say this is your patch and you are going to do the larger size seeds to start with. All you want to do is take them out, and I actually wouldn't concern yourself that much with spacing, to be totally honest, because in the event that things are too close, all you need to do is simply just remove that seed from, like, just clip off that seedling and you're done. So I don't really worry about that too much. And I also don't worry about, planting in lines. I'll do a video maybe on why we sow seeds in a line versus, sporadically all over. It actually comes down to equipment and how equipment runs. So equipment, does harvest and spray and seed in straight lines, but you don't have to follow those rules. So you can actually just put your seeds wherever you want. So actually, I should probably put this in. Sorry, this video is very unedited. It's going to be pretty raw. So one thing to consider is your actual landscape. So I'm in a raised bed, so I will plant based on the conditions of the environment I'm in, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a little bit. But if you're looking at a landscape, for example, and trying to decide where to put a garden, if you're in a drought, you actually want to look at the depressions in the land. And if you are in a very moist set of years, you want to look for something that's a little bit raised. So this year is going to be a drought year if you look at the drought maps for both the US and Canada, and most of the world for that matter. And so therefore, if you're gardening in a landscape, you'd want to grow inside of the depressions over top of the mounds or the hills. So the same rules actually apply to something like a raised bed. So what I will do, because this year is a drought year, is I will plant into a depression. So what I want to do is I want to dig out a space, again, making sure that everything in that space is fluffed. I have seeds in one hand, so this is really hard. So you want to make sure everything in that position is fluffed. So here it's nice and fluffy now. And so I will actually plant my seed into that depression. And for these larger size seeds, I just go to like the middle. I just go to the middle of like my first and second knuckle. I mean, it's like I said, I don't put too much thought in this because you'd be shocked what these will turn out like. So I'll put it there. So all I do is actually hold it kind of, because it's faster this way, particularly if your soil is fluff. So I'll hold it here between these two knuckles with my thumb, and I push in till my fingers hit kind of, my knuckles are kind of in place, and then I will place it in, and then I will sprinkle the soil on top. Now, because we're in a drought, the reason I made that so much deeper than what it needed to be actually is because I'm not going to fully fill in this hole, and I am going to leave it kind of open so that when I do water, it will flow into this patch, and it'll make it much easier for the water to be captured, as well as mulch and all that sort of stuff. It's much easier to sow in an environment like this. So then I just simply go through and I will do that into kind of all the spaces. So again, between here and here, dig out your hole, make sure it's fluffy, so kind of like powder, and then take it in, let it go, and then put a little bit of soil on top, and then I push, and you're good, because you push for seed soil contact. That's a great way to do it. So that's kind of how I will leave it in a drought scenario for the larger size seeds. So say you're planting something a little bit smaller, like lettuce. In this case, it's dill. So this is a seed where if I was to pinch it, I most definitely would crack it in half or just disintegrate it entirely. So I'll show you kind of what these look like. So here's kind of what the seeds look like. You can see how easy, like if I was to even just like grind it into my hand, I would destroy these seeds. So they're very tiny, very fragile. So what I do here in this case is you have two options. So you can do a line. Again, the line needs to be a depression because we're in a drought. So I'm going to make a little bit deeper. And then I'm going to remove all my chunks and or break the chunks down. And so my option here is to sow into this kind of row. Option number 2 is to have no row at all and then actually just broadcast the seeds over top of the soil surface with no divots. This is dill, so I'm actually not too worried about it just sprouting. If it wasn't dill and it was like lettuce, for example, I would do the row method. Herbs, I would do the row method. Chamomile, poppies, dill seed, you can just scatter. So when you scatter, you kind of want to know where exactly you're putting it. So I'm going to break, again, as you do this, you're going to dig up more and more of the hard stuff. And you just want to break it up. And some of this you're not going to be able to break up. Just put that over to the side and you can work on it later. I don't pay too much attention to the aggregates that are, solid as a rock because that's time not well spent. So what I do is this is my dill seed and I will just scatter it kind of all around in this space. So I can actually see my seeds. They're right here. They're kind of in this patch. So now what I do, rather than putting soil on top, is I will put either peat, compost, manure, or old potting soil. So in this case, I am going to use old potting soil. So I'm going to go grab that and I'll show you how I put this over top of these smaller seeds. Okay, so I grabbed probably too much. So I'm going to set this here. So for this, it's probably like a square foot, maybe square foot and a half. And then you're just going to kind of broadcast it over the surface and don't go too crazy. So when it's done, it'll look like this and essentially how you want it. Maybe it's not showing up on the camera very well, but other than these aggregates, the actual soil is completely covered with the peat. And then all I do is just kind of push it down and then make sure there's good seed soil contact. And then when I water it, it's nice and compacted, ready to go. Now, if you're doing a line, so something like this, I would just follow the same rule. So sprinkle it into the row and then put like the potting soil in that space. And then I just use the side of my hand and I actually just compact it this way. Now, if you're doing like a big garden, for example, one way to do it is a bamboo stick. So putting the bamboo stick in it and then just pushing on the bamboo stick so you can do several feet at a time. And then for this one, it's actually just a 2x4 or a 4x4, however big your rows are, putting that in place and then just like stepping on that nice and lightly, like 1 foot kind of pats, and then that will compact that. You don't want it super compact, but enough. And this will allow light through and it will work out perfectly for those smaller seeds. Okay, so I'm not much for straight lines. I don't really care that much, to be totally honest. So if you are into straight lines, a string between 2 stakes is probably the best way to go about it. And then you just stick 1 stake in the ground, walk to the other end of your garden, put that in, and then all you do is actually run your finger, a hoe, whatever the case is, not an actual hoe. Well, I mean, it is an actual hoe, down that kind of string to the depth that you are desiring, and then be done with it that way. I personally don't do that, but there's nothing wrong with that if you do like the straighter rows. Okay, so I'm editing this right now and the portion of the clip coming up is blurry. Just ignore that. It goes away pretty quickly, but it's irritating me right now and I don't want to refilm this entire video and not have it out for you guys before May long when I know a lot of you are actually putting seeds in. So hopefully you can ignore that. However, one section was so blurry that I had to cut it out, and that was the section on thinning. So we're gonna do that here right now from a cell phone. Thinning. Basically, everything you need to know is that you need to sow them in the density that they need to be sown in. So don't try to pre-thin by just placing your seeds sporadically, germination rates basically fall, and then the actual seedlings themselves seem to be weaker when they're not sown in clumps. So make sure you sow in clumps, number one. Number two is that you want to make sure that you do thin when it comes time to thinning. And I have a video on thinning, I'm pretty sure, or how I don't thin actually. That is what I would do if you don't like thinning, but please sow your carrots, sow your beets, everything like in a high density, because if you try to pre-thin, it's not going to work nicely for you. And if you skip thinning entirely, it's not going to work nicely for you. Okay, next up is transplants. So seed starting is done. The watering for both transplants and seed starts is identical. So step one is making sure that everyone is hardened off correctly. I don't think I have a hardening off video because I don't harden off. I skipped the step entirely. So let's start with these guys first. These ones, if you're using these, all I do is just rip off the bottom, and then that's what it looks like. And then I do a small, so you want to look first before you rip down the sides. Look for roots. Find a space where there's no roots showing through. So for example, right here, there's no roots. So then all you're going to do is kind of put a little bit of a crack down the middle, so it's like this, and then leave everything else attached. What I will say is if you want to add fertilizer, granular manure, compost, or organics, dig your hole even bigger. You never want roots touching full strength fertilizer, organic or otherwise, synthetic. So what I would do is I would make my hole just a little bit bigger. Say you put the fertilizer into this little patch here, break it up, mix it in, and then put that into place. Then grab soil that's not fertilized, do a small little broadcasting of that in place, and then you're going to put your plant in. So this guy, you can see he's kind of overgrown. It's a zinnia, and he's in my greenhouse at the very bottom. So what you want to do is put it in, and then you're going to place the soil around it. All the soil you put around it, you want to make sure it's been massaged. So any hard chunks you need to remove. And again, for this, you can follow the same rule of the divot in a drought and then above ground mounds for non-drought seasons. So then once I have it kind of ready like this, I just do a push. Okay, next one is tomatoes. I'll maybe do a video entirely on tomatoes and how to plant them in cold climates, because yeah, there's a specific way to do it and it doesn't involve sinking it to the hilt. Just so you know, it doesn't mean all tomatoes are supposed to be planted closer to the surface. It's just some in very specific scenarios where you would benefit from it being planted on the surface. So that's why I want to make a separate video about it, because it's very specific, not even on your location, but on the design of your bed, what kind of soil you have, all of it. So it's got to be a separate one. So the reason I picked this is because of kind of its unique structure. So it is kind of bent here. I can't straighten it per se, and I don't want to force it by any means. So I'm going to allow it to live its life sideways. So all you're going to do is I will take these two fingers, and this is the same for every plant, not just tomatoes. Put it in, and then generally, you just have to squeeze the sides and it'll pop out. If it doesn't, you may have to squeeze kind of around the space. And then that's kind of what your roots will look like. Now, this isn't pot bound by any means, so you don't have to really do much if you wanted to. Say this was pot bound, meaning there's a thick rim of white roots kind of around this edge. What I would do is actually just pull kind of on that edge, and you're going to hear some popping, which is totally fine. And then what else I would do is I take my finger and I just kind of make a little bit of a pull, and then just gentle. You're going to hear popping, and that's like totally normal. Don't stress that out too much. Okay, ready to go. So now what you will do is same thing, dig your hole. I should have pre-dug this. And you're going to follow the exact same rules. If I'm putting fertilizer into the space, then I'm going to mix my fertilizer up here, Sprinkle that in, and then I want to put non-fertilized soil in its position. So say this is my non-fertilized soil. I'm putting that into place. And generally speaking, you want like 1/2 inch buffer minimum. So now all you're gonna do is put him in. And this, by the way, is a wonderful company. They're Canadian, per mistake. Okay, so you see the bends. I want my leaves upwards. So anything going underground, I am gonna remove because I just don't want it to rot, which is not ideal. Okay, now this is right side up in the world of this tomato. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to place it so that it's this way. And this goes regardless, like any seed that you do follows the same rules. So if you have like a seed, for example, sorry, you guys just went on a massive ride there. Normally I don't talk well. Well, no, actually that's not true. I talk to myself all the time, all the cameras going. My hands are too dirty to... Poor Canon. If you ever need a good camera, it's Canon. This poor camera has been through rain and Ashley fingers, which in and of itself is nasty. Okay, so you can see here kind of how the tomato is going this way and that this isn't, 100% supported. So what I would do is I would hold my tomato up like this, and I'm going to fill in the bottom of that, kind of like a crutch. So now see, his roots are supported. This is sitting level. So this whole thing is sitting level. So I don't have any pressure on that stem. And then I'm going to move my soil in. Again, in a climate where you're going through a drought, you could make a depression here to make watering just a little bit simpler. Okay, so now see how he's still not 100%? Now all I'm gonna do is bring this around, bring this around, and I'm gonna straighten him up so his leaves are nice and straight, and I just wanna pack it in around. So now I know my kind of root ball goes to here, so I'm gonna push on this end. I am not pushing on this at all. And it doesn't matter if it's a flower, if it's a tomato, if it's I don't care what it is, do not push on a stem. So just push here on this end and you are good, ready to go. I hope that this is helpful. I don't really know. I'm trying to do it kind of exactly how I do it. The problem is though, I don't actually put much thought into it. I just get it in the ground. And I always have. It doesn't matter what size my garden is. I, of course, enjoy gardening, but it's just one of those things where it's like, I'm careful at the beginning and then I just go wild. So, okay, so I did pour pots. I did regular pots to an extent, so the depth in which you plant it is just going to be enough where you can get the divot for a drought and then be able to also simultaneously support the plant, if you will. And that goes for all plants. So I did flowers. I followed that rule. The zinnias are flowers. And then I did it for my tomato. I followed those rules. It wouldn't matter what it is. I'm following those rules regardless. Actually, no. You know what? I'm going to show you how to plant one more type of plant because this one actually would be different. So hold on one second. My favorite part about this is that my mic is still on, so we can just hear me jamming out singing if I ever so chose. Thyme or nasturtiums, folks? Which one do I use? Brogus, which one do I use? Do I use the nasturtiums or do I use the thyme? The thyme. Ain't got no time for getting the thyme. So we're gonna use nasturtiums. They follow the same rules. If I don't snap it, be gentle, Ashley. Be gentle for the geek crew. Show the geek crew the quality of your pants without my pants. I mean, my pants may be valuable to the geek crew. I don't think they are, but any users. Okay, well, a lot of the soil's missing off that, but you folks won't mind, will ya? If I leave this in the video, I'm just gonna laugh at it later. It's gonna be like, wow, I actually did that. Watch that YouTube algorithm get so mad. Okay, so this is a nasturtium. If you don't know what nasturtiums do and what they look like, they're kind of like a hanging plant. These are hangers. Hangers, not like hangers because you didn't wear a bra your whole life, but hangers as in plant hangers. Okay, any hoosers. Okay, So what you want to do if you're doing hanging plants is actually position them in a way where they're going to naturally hang. If you just willy-nilly plant these, you'd be shocked in what directions they go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of build up a little bit of a ridge here. You won't notice this once the mulch is on and everything's watered and ready to go. So now you're going to take your hangers, and instead of planting them kind of straight up and down, what I do is I actually plant all my hangers on an angle. So in this case, I'm actually going to go this way because that's natural, despite the fact that the poor leaves are upside down, but phototropism will figure that out. Okay, then I'm just going to put this around the root ball, break it all up, give it a little pat. Okay, now see how he's like this? It doesn't look very good right now. I promise you, in the middle of July, this is going to be like a big, voluptuous, almost kind of like me, plant. So it'll look really, really good, promise you. So I do that with nasturtiums, thyme, mint, oregano. What else have I done with it? Lobelia, bacopa, robinia. Yeah, there's quite a few that you could do that with, but that's what I do. And in my hanging baskets and in my pots as well, I plant them all kind of like on an angle, and then I put the soil. Now, given it does, you know, you got to be a little bit more careful when it comes to watering because things can dry out a little bit faster when they're kind of in that setup, if you will. But the payoff is much better because then you don't have to wait as long for them to kind of trail over, and then you can visually kind of see, you know, what direction it's going to go in. So then you can make adjustments to like your seed placement, your transplants, like all this sort of stuff. And that's everything I do. If there's anything else I do, I will put it on Instagram. I honestly don't think anything else is going to come up. Okay, so mulch. I move all the mulch out of the way, kind of like I showed over there. I sow my seeds. And then if it's seed sown, whether it's the small ones or the large ones, I actually leave my mulch off. That is of no, like there's no science based in that at all. That is just my preference, is I leave it off because I want to be able to see when things come up and are ready. So I leave my mulch off of the space. Once things come up and they're above where I would normally have my mulch layer, that's when I put my mulch on. So my favorite mulch is grass. My second favorite is like shredded leaves, and then straw, again shredded, make sure there's no seeds in it. That's kind of like the three that I go with. I don't use wood chips. They're not my, I have used wood chips. I do not like using wood chips. Cardboard is another one that you could use that actually works pretty nicely. Or like butcher block paper is one that I actually saw. Okay, so Lee Valley sells one that's not a butcher block paper, if you will, but it works wonderfully. So that is one. Just anything that you use for mulch, I won't use it until everything's spreaded. Now, if I'm transplanting and there's no seed sown kind of in that transplant space, that is when I will put mulch on immediately because it doesn't affect anything. I just let her buck because there's nothing that I'm concerned about not visually seeing, if that makes sense. And again, that is complete Ashley brain. There's no basis in that at all. If you choose to put mulch on right away, go ahead. To be honest, it's probably not going to affect anything. It's just me. I'm the problem. Okay, so the next one is buckets. So this is how I don't harden off my plants. And I completely skip the step entirely. And that is via this device. Okay, so the size in which you use completely depends on the size of your transplant. This is a pre-workout from when Ashley used to work out. It's old because it's plastic and it lasts forever. I cut a hole in the bottom, and I have a whole video on this actually. I'll maybe link it here. I just don't feel like getting my 5-gallon pail buckets apart. Everyone knows how difficult that is, and I just don't want to fight with that tonight, so we're not going to. But this is just laying around. I also will use Folgers coffee. I will use protein powder containers that my husband uses. I use Coffee Mate from work, like the Coffee Mate at work. When we run out of that, I'm notorious for taking those. That's where actually I get all the Folgers from, is from work as well. And I cut the bottoms off, and then all I do is I will put it around the plant. So a couple things here, reasons why this works so well, is one, you can water, and you need to water. Please water inside of the actual container hole, and that will help retain the moisture. If you just water around it, it's not gonna end well for you. So water inside of the bucket. And then the second thing is that it actually heats kind of ambiently around the plant itself. It's not like a huge difference in degrees Celsius, but it's slight, and it's enough to kind of take the edge off or hardening off. Obviously, the sun, it's shaded from sun penetration because the whole, like, it's a big circle. So the whole friggin' thing is guarded from sun. And then wind. It's also guarded from wind entirely. Pets, children, critters also tend to stay away from them when you are kind of doing that sort of stuff. So that is what I do to make sure that everyone's hardened off a-okay, and I don't harden off. That's how I just skip that whole process, because I'm lazy. Okay, watering. This is, yeah, how am I going to show this? Okay, hold on one second. Okay, if you use slow release, you don't have to fertilize every time you water. If you want to fertilize every time you water with a liquid or granular dissolved in water, you can go ahead, or you can be like me and not usually use granular. I will sometimes. I don't really use compost or manures, and I also don't fertilize with liquid fertilizer. I do when they're in the greenhouse. After that, I lose interest. So I use something called a hose, and the hose actually, and then that is one powerful. Okay, I do not love I don't love the pressure on this. Okay. I don't want water running. I just kind of want it